Hello, boys and girls. So today we are going to read about the Department of Labor. And if you remember yesterday, we read a little bit of the book about some of the crazy jobs that some people do. And it's interesting because there are just so many different kinds of jobs, not only throughout our world, but throughout our country. And that is why the Department of Labor is so important, so that people who are working in those jobs are safe and they have fair treatment and things like that. And as I said before, it is not a perfect system, just like the Department of Education and even the Department of Agriculture. They're not perfect, but they're there to try to help make sure that that our country is a safe and fair place to work and live and learn. So let's read this article together. As I've been doing for the past couple of articles, you are not going to have to do markups. However, I'm just going to kind of do markups as I go, and I'm going to, just kind of make comments or observations throughout. And then at the end, you're just going to do a little bit of writing for me. So the Department of Labor, here is the Department of Labor seal. So as you can see there, that is what that's their seal. So that's their official, I guess, not mascot, but like their symbol or their emblem. So let's read a little bit about it. The Department of Labor is part of the United States federal government. It is responsible for making sure that employers treat their employees fairly. In fact, the Department of Labor is responsible for enforcing 180 laws. Now, I'm going to highlight that just because that's a lot of laws, and that's what I'm going to put. So that is a lot of laws to enforce. So think about that, 180 laws. Do you know all of the 180 laws for people working? I don't. Ask your parents or your grandparents or someone, do they know all of the 180 laws? I don't think, most likely, not many people know all 180 laws. I do know a couple of the laws for sure. I know some of the laws that have to do with the Department of Labor and the workplace, but I definitely don't know all 180. So that's a lot of laws. These laws are all related to workers and working conditions. Working conditions have to do with how safe, clean, and comfortable it is for employees in their workplace. One of the most important laws that the Department of Labor enforces is the Fair Labor Standards Act. This act is also known as the FLSA. The FLSA sets the minimum wage, which is the least amount of money any employer can pay an employee. It also says that if someone works for longer than they're supposed to, they need to be paid more per hour for that time. So I'm gonna highlight that because I know what that's called. Do you know what that's called? Your parents might have talked about it. If they work extra time than they need to, or maybe if they work certain weekends or holidays or something, it's called overtime. This is called overtime. So that's if people work, depending on what job you have, if you work during hours that you wouldn't normally work. So the FLSA also says how many hours a child under the age of 16 can legally work. Now I'm going to highlight that too, because I got my first job when I was 16, pretty much exactly 16. And I know that there are also laws saying what a child under 18 can do. So for example, I'll give you an example. I worked at Chick-fil-A when I was finishing high school and when I was in college. And if you were not 18, you were not allowed to work back in the kitchen. You had to work up front or in drive-through. You were not allowed to work with the equipment back there. And I know that that is most, I'm pretty sure it's a law across the whole country, but it's definitely at least a state in Pennsylvania, a law in Pennsylvania saying that, you can't do certain things if you're under the age of 18. So I'm kind of making a connection to how many hours a child under the age of 16 can legally work. Another important law is the Occupational Safety and Health Act. This law says that employers must provide safe working conditions for their employees. So think about that. That's a really important law. You want your parents to be safe going to work. You want to be safe when you eventually get a job. I want to be safe going to work. So that's a really important law. This is an illustration of a construction worker. Before these and other laws were created, workers often were treated unfairly. During the 1800s and early 1900s, there were horrible working conditions for employees. There were very few laws that protected workers. Now, I want you to think, if you were in my class, we did an immigration project. And if you were not in my class, that is 100% okay because you're going to learn a little bit about it. But we basically go through the whole process of immigration back when like Ellis Island was the really popular place to immigrate to, and like in the early 1900s, late 1800s. And one of the things that we talked about were jobs, and that it was really hard for many people to get a good job. And we talked about how, I basically gave them like a list of types of jobs that they would have during that time period and how many hours they would have to work for very little pay. So the conditions were horrible. A lot of people also worked in factories, and they were really unsafe conditions. People would get hurt in factories, people would get sick because the factories didn't have good air quality, and all of that was for very, very little money. They were not treated well at all. And it was even worse if you were an immigrant who came from another country because you couldn't speak English very well. You didn't necessarily have a great education. Sometimes you did, but not always. And you basically had to take whatever job you were going to be able to get because you were trying to afford to live or you were trying to afford to send for your family so they could come over. So I'm just going to say we learned about this earlier this year. And once again, if you were not in my class, that is okay. This is just my connection, and I'm remembering that we talked a little bit about this. And honestly, your teachers also may have definitely talked about this as well when we talked about things like communities. So there were very few laws that protected workers. It was often dangerous for employees to go to work. Minimum wage laws were also not enforced like they are today. As a result, many workers would not earn enough money to support themselves or their families. Employers also did not pay their employees more money for working overtime. As a result, people would often work through the night. So that is what I'm going to make a connection to what I just said. We learned that people would work crazy hours, 18 to 22 hours sometimes, and they wouldn't get paid much at all. So, a lot of times they would literally just spend their entire day in their workplace and much of the night too. They'd go home, they'd get a couple hours of sleep, and they'd go back to work. Many children worked during this period of time too, which is also what we talked about in my class. We talked about how if you were a child, you often were forced to work, and not just work like helping with chores or helping with the farm. No, like actually go to work. And you were not able to go to school because your parents needed you to work. So think about how that would make you feel. Think about how, now I know some of you are like, I don't have to go to school. That's great. But actually think about, you also didn't get to play or have friends or get a good night's sleep or relax. You were expected to basically behave like an adult in the workplace. So you would, go to work in the morning and you would work all day and you'd come home and probably still have to do chores to help out. And it's not like you got to keep that money. That money went towards your family. So just think about that and think about how lucky I know that I am. I feel very fortunate that we do have these laws now and that, I get to teach you instead of have to worry about you going off and working or only coming to school part of the year because you have to work the rest of the year. They also had to work very long hours. Sometimes 6-year-olds would work 19 hours a day. So think about that. I'm going to put a comment just saying this is awful because that's kind of my thought. So think about that. That would be if you went to school or if you went to work, sorry. Now 6 years old, you're in kindergarten, maybe 1st grade, depending on when your birthday is. So 6 years old, you can't go to school. When our 6-year-olds are learning how to read and learning how to do math and learning how to write, 6-year-olds at that point will go to work at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and they or even earlier, let's say 4 o'clock in the morning, and we know that 12 hours from them would be 4 o'clock in the afternoon, plus 7 more hours would be 11 o'clock at night. So they get there at 4 o'clock in the morning and they don't get done until 11 o'clock at night. So by the time they get home, they have what, 4 hours of sleep? These are little 6-year-olds, little kids. So think about you having to do that. You don't get bathroom breaks or lunch. You don't get a really tiny lunch break. You don't get to leave. Um, our school day is only like 7.5, 8 hours. So imagine working 19 hours and hard work. So just, think about that. The machinery in these factories was also dangerous. Many workers died when they were working with this machinery. Over time, more laws were created to protect workers. The Department of Labor enforced many of these laws. If an employer breaks any of these laws, they will face consequences. Do you think that the Department of Labor is important? So that is going to be your writing prompt. Why do you think the Department of Labor is important? Using this article, give me 2 reasons why you think that the Department of Labor is important. Now, just look at some of the things that we learned that they do. All of the laws that they create. These give some examples of some of the laws that are important. If we didn't have the minimum wage law, an employer could pay you $1 an hour, while some other employers are paying you $20 an hour. So think about that. And if you don't have a choice and you have to work and you have to work wherever they hire you, then they're getting away with only paying you $1 an hour. So our minimum wage is, I believe it's 8 something right now, $8 and something. I know when I first got my job, it was when I first got my job in high school, it was like $7.25, I think, or $7.10 when I first got my job. So I know it's gone up definitely over the time, and it does go up every so often. And then obviously all of this about the horrible working conditions and about children working. You guys are kids, and your life could be so different if you lived in a different time period, or even if you live in different countries, because not all countries have these laws. And, sometimes kids do need to work. And we are fortunate enough that we live in a country where you guys are protected and you're allowed to just go to school and learn. And I know that may not be your all time favorite thing to do every day. However, it is building your future and it is helping you to be able to be a productive citizen of society and hopefully get a job that is fair because of the labor laws. Hopefully your job will be fair and hopefully you will get paid fairly and get paid overtime and have fair hours. And that's all thanks to the Department of Labor. So I am looking forward to reading your responses. This is actually going to be our last department that we're going to learn about this year because obviously this is the last week of school. So we are going to, I'm going to put a link for the other documents for some of the other departments, and I'm going to show them to you. So one of the other departments is the Department of Transportation, and obviously that has to do with transportation. The Department of Health and Human Services, so that's all the things like healthcare and everything like that. And then the Department of Justice, which has to do with making sure, like the court system and making sure that everyone has justice, all of the legal issues, everything like that. So those are 3 of the other departments that we have articles on, and they're really interesting. They're a great read. If you want to read them, you definitely do not have to read them, but you can if you are interested in them. I'm going to post the links there, and you can kind of just do some free reading in your free time. But I really enjoyed learning about the Department of Education, the Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Labor with you. Those are 3 really important departments to all of us. They affect us all every day of our lives. The Department of Education affects us because I'm a teacher and you're my students. And, we it affects the way we do school and the rules that we have, and what we need to teach you. And the Department of Agriculture, is important because that's where our food comes from. We talked about how even food, like if you think about spaghetti, you don't think about noodles being grown on a farm. However, the ingredients used to make those noodles are grown on a farm, right? And same for the tomato sauce. And some of you had um, some awesome ideas of foods that you love and how they're actually processed. And then obviously the Department of Labor, that you might not think that affects you right away because it has to do with jobs, and your job right now is to be a student. But as we learned, without the Department of Labor, this would really affect you, and you might not be able to go to school the way that you can. So I hope that you enjoyed these, articles and these discussions and the books that went along with them. I know that I really did. And I am looking forward to our virtual field trip tomorrow. I'm not going to tell you where we're going, but and I hope that you enjoy it as well. And that is all I have for today. So I'm looking forward to reading what you have to say about this article. All right. Thanks, third grade. It's been great.